All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ashley Davies, Chair of the Master Planning Implementation Committee. This open meeting of the Master Planning Implementation Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of June 16th, 2021, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. All members of the town of Northborough are allowed All members of the Master Planning Implementation Committee are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. I'm not sure I said that right.
You did it eventually.
This order allows the Master Planning Implementation Committee to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Members of the public who wish to view the live stream of this meeting may do so by going to Northborough Remote Meetings on YouTube via the link listed on the agenda. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will, I'm not sure if this will feature public comment, so I'll say that. All right, so members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Rick Leaf.
Here.
Amy Paretsky.
Here.
Julianne Hirsch.
Here.
Millie Milton.
Here.
Jean Kennedy.
Here.
Jean Cahill.
Here.
John Campbell.
Here.
Fran Backstrom.
Here.
Dario Damari.
Here.
Jim, oh, that's it. That's all of us. All right. No staff to be called at the moment. All right. I think that's it for me, right? So let's get started. Rick, I think you and Kathy had discussed the first agenda item, which was a quick review of master plan. Is that right? Kathy's not here, so I didn't know what her intentions were for that first bit.
Yeah, the idea here was that, not everyone who's on the committee was on the steering committee. So just people had a chance now to see the plan and go through it. And before we started talking about the recommendations, just wanted to open the floor up if any committee members had any questions or comments or anything about the plan itself that maybe we could cover before we got into the recommendations. I guess the other thing, Ashley, too, is Kathy did send out minutes. I'm not sure if the agenda covered approval of the minutes, but that's something we need to do tonight. Also, we could do that now or at the end of the meeting, either way.
Okay.
But I guess the point of the first agenda item was just to see if anybody had any general comments or questions about the master plan in general.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I just have one comment. In the list of attendees, it listed Fran Backstrom as chairman, which is not the case.
Okay.
So I think the minutes need to be at least amended to just have Fran's name there. That probably was carried forward from probably from the steering committee meeting.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And Amy's got her hand up too.
Yeah, I had one comment too.
Okay.
And it was on page 4. Fourth paragraph up. It said, Mr. Peterson said the action list has approximately 155 items. But if they only have VHB for 5 of those, he wants to make sure that the framework is developed. But I think he meant VHB for 5 meetings. Like, we don't have VHB for 155 items. So I think the minutes should be updated to say if they only have VHB for 5 meetings versus those.
But we do have VHB for 5 items as well.
Oh, okay. So maybe that's what they meant.
I think so. Well, I'm not sure, but I think so. In the contract that Kathy sent around, it looks like they'll help us with 5 items, 5 action items.
Oh, okay.
I'll double check though.
Yeah. Or so maybe change it to 5 action items. I don't know. When I read it, I got.
Okay.
But maybe not. All right. I was thinking meetings over action items.
Well, I can check with Bill, just make sure. Okay.
Thanks.
What did Bill mean by the last part of that sentence?
That's the question, right?
He wants to make sure a framework is developed to reuse with modifications.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
didn't get
makes
that
some
really
sense.
either, but
Yeah.
I think he was talking about, whatever gets left behind for us to use as a tool or tools to manage this thing. He
Mhm.
wants to make sure it's usable and in place. When he said modifications, probably as we go down the road, there'll probably be sometimes we have to do things slightly differently than the way we did it at the beginning. I think that's all
Right.
he was trying to say.
I think Donnie touched on that too. Like they'll help us with 5 items and then they want to leave us with a template for working on the others as we go forward. So that makes sense.
Then I would move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Second, anybody seconding?
Second, Julianne Hirsch seconded.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 I,
Aye.
Should I go through name by name since we're on Zoom? Is that how
I
that
think
works?
usually, yeah, we do.
Okay, Julianne Hirsch,
Aye.
Amy Pretsky,
I,
Millie Milton,
Aye.
Jean Kennedy,
Aye.
Jean Cahill,
Aye.
John Campbell,
Aye.
Fran Backstrom. Aye. Dario Damari.
Aye.
All right, so moved.
You forgot me, but I'll say aye.
Oh, well, you made the motion. Sorry, I'm learning the process here, guys.
You're good.
Bear with me. It's the first meeting. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah.
All right, so in going into the first agenda item, did anybody have any questions about the master plan that, as you were reviewing the priorities, anything that wasn't clear or any other questions you might have before you decide on your top action items?
I had one
Question asked.
question. I read in the minutes that the master planning process was conducted over about 18 months. I believe there were at least 18 public meetings to get public input. I was wondering if somebody on the steering committee could just give a brief summary of the public participation process for the master plan.
You want to
Yeah,
do that,
I'm-
Fran? You want me to do it? If Ashley, you can do it.
Either one of you, fine.
I'll start and then you guys can chip in. So basically, the public participation process started with meetings in school cafeterias where the consultants basically did a brief explanation of the process and then had a way to gather input from the community as to what they thought was important and what things ought to be done in the town. There were ways to write down what you thought were most important items on sticky notes and put them on whiteboards and things like that. So there were, how many were there? At least 3, I think, of those.
I think there were 3 total.
3 in school cafeterias where people were invited just to come in and just basically through structured and unstructured methods, provide input as to what they thought was important and where the town should be going, what they'd like to see happen. And I think the balance of these things were the steering committee meetings that were open to the public, where public people came, and there was always a time at the meetings where Fran would call for public input and comments. So there were 3 sort of structured community input gathering sessions. And then there were the meetings. I think there were also some surveys that were sent out online that weren't really meetings, but other ways for people to send in their input. So there were meetings, data gathering meetings, surveys, and then public participation at all of these steering committee meetings.
And I think we gathered information at Applefest too. Okay, and maybe one other, and 2 rounds of surveys, if I recall,
I think you're right, 2 rounds.
initially and then later on.
I just say that from my experience, that's a very extensive public participation process for the master plan.
John, did you have your hand up?
I did. A general question, maybe I should have paid more attention when I was interviewed, but what is the intention of the timeframe and scope of the master plan implementation committee. Did you envision it to be open-ended, carry on for multiple years, overseeing different items being implemented? Or was it intended to expire at some point where other committees and initiatives took over? What was the vision there?
I mean, I think my recollection, and I don't know if anybody else has other memories of it, but I thought that really the implementation committee is supposed to be open-ended, kind of like the open space committee was created from creating the open space plan and then sort of rolls with it. And when the plan is up for renewal, then the open space committee works on it. I think the same thing would be with the master planning implementation committee. We work on it through the life of the plan, which I think is supposed to be sort of the vision was over the next 20 years, I think. And then, update it when things change in town or when the committee deems that it should be updated.
I think we all have terms that expire. I think the idea was over time to change the makeup of the committee, give other people in the community a chance to participate. So we have the awesome responsibility to get this thing rolling. But I don't think we're expected to stay with it for the rest of our lives. But I agree with Ashley. The plan is going to take quite a while to roll out, and there's going to need to be committee participation on an ongoing basis for a long time. But my understanding is the makeup of the committee, the membership will change over time.
Good, thank you.
Anyone else had any comments or questions? Oh, Julianne?
So as part of the steering committee, was the school committee or the school in general represented?
Yeah, there was a member of the school board. She was a member of the master planning committee.
Is it possible for us to, well, if there's a desire or interest in doing this, that in an upcoming meeting discussing having representatives from this one or two from a school board come, add to our implementation committee? They are a very large, and as I read through the plan, there's, so much of it is maintain the excellence of the schools and all of that sort of thing. So I don't know if there's interest, maybe we could discuss it at a future meeting. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we need to do in the next meeting or two is come up with a process and procedures and think about creating subcommittees based on what our top priorities are. And I think for schools, for sure, they're going to need to take it and decide what the top action items are. There's going to need to be a subcommittee because we can't say what the schools want or need or can handle at the moment. So I think, yeah, that would make sense, but we will have to discuss that, procedure and determine what sort of subcommittees we need.
Okay, thank you.
I think also, as I recall, the schools were kind of considered separate from this. I mean, there's an overlap, but there wasn't like a focus on master planning for the schools. It was like the schools and the school committee and the school administration are responsible for long-term planning for the schools. And we had some discussions about why wasn't there more about the schools in the master plan? And the answer kind of was, well, it's really not about the schools. It's about the town and what the town wants and needs to do. And there's a natural linkage between the town and the schools. But the purpose of the plan wasn't to do master planning for the schools, but to the extent school participation could be helpful in fostering some of the goals that came out of the plan, that was beneficial. But we shouldn't be including school committee members on the master plan to start to add a whole subsection of school master planning. That's not the intent of this procedure.
For sure. And it being a regional school committee makes it even more complex.
Right.
And I think, yeah, it was where we touched on school issues that may affect the schools, or, in ways that we could support the schools generally, but not anything specific, I think. But Fran, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to just piggyback on that, and they will be partners in some of this, when we get to the goals and recommendations, they will be our partners in it, but not necessarily members of the committee.
Great. All right, well, if there are no more questions about the master plan itself, we can jump into the document that Kathy prepared for the meeting with all the priorities that people submitted. So I had a question for Kathy on that actually, but she's not here at the moment. I didn't know if others felt the same way, and that is that I didn't know if it was intended to be comprehensive, because a few of my top items didn't make it, and I didn't know if others had the same experience. So I might ask that they did a great job in a short time frame, because I know, the items came into them late, but maybe if we could have a spreadsheet, or just if it's intended to be comprehensive. So I don't know if others had the same experience.
I had some items left out.
I did too.
Sure.
Okay, so
They
John,
compiled it
Dario.
earlier and maybe just didn't all get in there. Could be maybe a second edit is involved.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Like some of them say one vote, but there's like 5 items, but there are a lot of items missing. So how did they pick the one vote?
Well, there's only 6 votes in the
Yeah,
top category. So
Right.
is that only taken from 6 people, or had they printed that section when they got 6 responses? I wasn't sure.
I had the same question about that. It seemed like on the short term, there were more votes. It still didn't seem to add up to all the people that could have been, voting kind of thing. And certainly in the top overall recommendations, you'd think that when I first looked at it, I thought that only 6 people participate. But then when you looked at the short term, there were more than 6 people. I think.
Yeah, I'm
it's hard
sorry.
to tell. They couldn't pick 3.
I misspoke. There were 3 items with 3 votes,
yeah.
Right.
4
That's-
4 items with 2 votes, 4 items with 1 vote. So I mean,
Yeah,
it still could have been just 1 each from different participants.
Right. The numbers could add up, but if there are at least 3 of us that
Right.
are experiencing not having our priorities
But
there.
yeah, none of mine were in there. I didn't I feel left out.
It's kind of hard to discuss what the top priorities are and how we should move forward if we don't have an accurate listing. So I'm not sure how people want to proceed today if we don't have that.
Well, you could pick the ones that had 3 votes anyway. At least they.
Ashley?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I question is, so like there might have been, 2 votes for create a downtown planning revitalization committee, but then there were 2 votes for another downtown thing. And so, it's because there were so many specific things about downtown. If
Yeah.
you took them all together, did downtown win overwhelmingly?
Right.
That's what I tried to do, Julianne. I went through as best I could in a few minutes. So for example, under overall recommendations, I got that there were 7 votes for things that had to do with the downtown.
mhm,
And under short-term recommendations, there were 10 votes that had with things to do with the downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And so that 7 plus 10, the downtown got more mentions in those 2 categories than anything else.
Okay, so yeah. And I
So, I
think that's a
mean-
fair way to approach it, kind of.
And
Thanks, Rick, for doing that.
Like sidewalks got no mentions in the overall recommendations, but it got 8 short-term mentions.
Mhm.
That was like the second short-term next to downtown. Sidewalks had the most mentions out of the short-term stuff. So I didn't have a lot of time to do this, but one thing we could do once we, get a new listing that seems to encompass everybody's input
Mhm.
is to group things like you mentioned and just see what jumps out as getting the most mentions in total when you take all the different aspects of a particular type of thing, and then say, okay, well, if downtown and sustainability and sidewalks seem to be what everybody is voting for, then we ought to figure out how to get moving on one or some of those. And I think somebody mentioned last time, we ought to try and pick something that we can have a short-term win on. So we might want to find something else that maybe would be reasonably good to do, and we could do it fairly quickly and say, hey, look, the master plan committee, work with the town to make happen.
Amy?
Well, one thing I do think is quick, like if downtown was the main theme, which it really was with the overall steering committee too, like when they did those little bubbles and stuff, it said downtown with the bigger bubbles. But in February, all the grants, you can start applying for grants, and that downtown initiative grant is this February. So maybe as like, at least a starting point, if everybody thinks that it's downtown, if we at least apply for the grant, you can actually get the design out of that grant. At least you're starting something short term, we could apply for the grant.
Right, it's a good point.
Jean?
I looked at it a little bit differently. There were multiple recommendations that related to the downtown. So if you picked any one of them, and there are multiple ones that are listed in the summary this afternoon, I sort of call them ancillary recommendations. So for example, if I suggested conduct a design study of downtown, I had 5 other recommendations that related to downtown and to the downtown planning process. So if we do what you're saying, Rick, we look at it that way, then we're actually able to bite off more than just one recommendation, but we can actually start a process that deals with, 3 or 4 or 5 related recommendations on one topic. So I think that would be a productive way for the committee to proceed.
Right. And part of that would be, as Amy mentioned, it might be something that we need to do fairly short term. Like you said, if there's a funding opportunity that's got a drop dead date, that maybe that thing is something we have to, even though some other things need to happen eventually, one of those things we need to get working. And I was thinking the same way as far as anything else we might do that might have a budget impact, that you find out, has a budget process, when the budget process is happening, and, could something, a placeholder or something be put in the budget if we think we want the town to budget for something also. So, yeah, so I think there's a couple of different ways to look at it, but I agree with you, Jean, that, and once you've got multiple things addressing the same idea, then the idea is to order them. Okay, in what order would you do them, to make sense, to make progress on that overall initiative.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you might want to create a downtown planning revitalization committee, and their first task is to apply for the downtown initiative grant in February. And then a number of the other recommendations, do a design study, a visualization study, that would all sort of fall out of that initial process.
Right.
By the way, following on that, are we expected, is there an expectation that there might be an action item that becomes a town meeting warrant item from this committee this year, or is there no clear
I don't
path?
think we've
because-
gotten that far yet, but.
Yeah,
It's possible.
Sorry, Fran had her hand up, and then Amy.
I just wanted to, in addition to what Jean and Rick just said, we also have, there's an action item somewhere in here, I'm trying to find it. What do we want, what do we want downtown to be? Like where? I mean, so there's so many pieces about downtown that I think Jean's idea that we start with one and it's almost like a chain reaction. But I don't know which one is first.
Yeah, Amy, go ahead.
oh, just to follow up on that, and I don't even know either when I was reading them all, but I did look through the downtown initiative grant, and there were towns who applied for the design. So I bet if they do the design, what comes out of that design, they'll probably tell you what goes first, I would guess. But to talk back about town meeting, I know from a planning board perspective, somebody asked the planning board if there would be any bylaws coming out of the master plan implementation committee this year. And Kathy is not online tonight, but she could speak to it. But she thought that would be a lofty goal, like it's already going into October. So she said to come up with ideas that we could get written. We usually have to have them written by January. So to have an idea and have the bylaw written by January to get on town meeting warrant might not work with the time frame. I guess if there's something we all really, really want to do, we could try to get it done. But I remember at the planning board, she mentioned it might be a lofty goal to get things on this year's town meeting. But I could be wrong. She's not on tonight, so maybe we could ask her.
I think that's a good point.
Well, I definitely kind of looked at it the same way Jean was talking about with when I gave my top priority, I was like, and then, all these other things follow, in my comment. So I think it makes sense to tackle. Does seem like downtown is the top priority. It does seem like we could check some things off really quickly by creating the committee and getting an RFR out for a design plan. So, or just the committee and task them with a whole host of things that are on this list. So, that does seem like a really good place to start. And along with that, kind of check off some of these short-term, easy pieces that people might agree on.
To your point, John, also, another important thing is the long-term capital plan. I wish Bill were here tonight, because another thing is that if we start talking about something that's going to cost money, the town already has got 5 years worth of capital expense kind of lined up. And so if we want to do something like, let's say, sidewalks, there may be a way to get that grant funded, or maybe not. Maybe the DPW is going to have, once we figure out what to do, the DPW is going to have to put in their budget some amount of capital spending to do the sidewalk work. So now the question is, in what fiscal year does the financial planning committee feel that a sidewalk project would seem to make sense based on everything else? So, eventually there might have to be a warrant article to support that, but the year in which it would come would sort of be at the discretion of the selectmen and the financial planning committee based on all the other things that are sitting out there for capital planning. I think Bill can provide, good input to us as a committee as we start talking about spending money also. So even if we don't do warrant articles, maybe at some point, next time Bill joins the meeting, it might be good to get a primer from him on how that 5-year capital plan thing works and how we could start to get some input into it if we think there's some things we want to do that can't be grant funded, but the town would spend money, as they do for other capital projects.
My thinking about how this committee is going to work, and I don't know if this is the same as everyone else, but I kind of had the feeling like most of these are going to get assigned to different town boards, right? And they'll kind of take on the process of whether they apply for CPC funding or if they work with the DPW or apply for grants. Some of them may be just for us to work on, but a lot of them I think are going to get assigned to various groups. Is that sort of how others saw this, or yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I agree,
So-
Ashley.
Okay, so for the most part, we're probably not going to have to worry too much about, it will be good to think about the capital planning and the budgeting and where the money's coming from. But I think a lot of it's, working with the various committees and boards in town and just kind of assigning and then having them work through the details.
Following on to what we spoke about the first meeting, if it's not clearly the purview of an existing board and committee, then that's where a subcommittee might come in. And then I guess I can't help but ask this question now. There are so many master plan items that recommend another committee, and I'm wondering how practical is that? And can this committee, subcommittees within this committee or that, take on those tasks too? It just seems that we spin our wheels creating other groups, unless there is a natural group, that's already sort of started. I don't know that to be the case, but there did seem to be a lot of committee making and their recommendations.
Dario, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just, I just want to make sure that we make sure we get everybody's votes in first before we determine what direction we head. And it certainly does seem like they're all concentrating around the downtown, which makes a lot of sense because that's, kind of the heart of the community. When it comes to committees, I think there's different people on this committee that have different skill sets. I see a lot of things here asking to do, what I do for a living, which is kind of interesting. Not that I'm the one to do it, but I'm sitting there going, yeah, well, I've got one of those projects and I've got one of those projects. And some of them, I just want to comment on one that I don't know if anybody realizes that it's kind of critical where we don't get to pick the time on it. There was one about the trees and the streetscape.
That's,
Okay, so I'm really kind of into that stuff, and I walk an average of 5 to 6 miles a day. You can't tell by my stomach, but I do. But there are a lot of trees in this town dying because poison ivy is growing up and it's debarking the trees. Big old 100, 200-year-old trees. If you wait 3 years, they're all coming down on their own. And it's really easy to prevent it by just getting rid of the ivy that's growing up the trees. And a lot of times even the leaves from the ivy will take the sun away on so many streets in town, all in front of Peasley and down by the pond. There's just so many big trees getting killed down Brigham. And you can see them if they're leaves going up the trunk, the poison ivy gets behind it, pulls the bark off, and then the 250-year-old tree, we can't do anything about it anymore. And I'm just throwing it out as a little one. It's not a huge deal, but if you wait 2 years, you lose 50 of them.
Right. And bittersweet as well. I know other towns worked on that with their MVP planning. I don't think that came up in the Northborough MVP plan, but just, working on invasive issues around existing trees. I think the tree planting, that was more of a along Route 20 situation, the tree planting item, although I don't know if we have any control over that really. But it's a good point. I mean, we'll tackle what we can, right? Amy?
I'm new on the design review committee, and Dario is too, but there are a lot of applications that come in front of us and it downtown too. And we can ask for sidewalks and trees. So I would think if we have support from the master plan that sidewalks and trees are something that are wanted in town, then maybe we can have more input. In the past, we've been told that the town doesn't want to maintain more sidewalks. But if that's what we're deciding to do, then maybe we can say, well, the surveys from the master plan and the committee members have decided that, we do want more sidewalks. So is there a way we can maintain them? Because a lot of these applications come in front of the planning board and we could ask for a sidewalk. We could ask for trees, but a lot of times we're told, the town doesn't want any more sidewalks to have to maintain.
I guess
Sometimes, yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, the idea would be in a case like that, once again, we're going to have to come to some consensus as a committee as to what are the items we want to start to tackle sooner than later. If sidewalks turns out to be one of them, then I think either through this committee or a subcommittee of this committee, we'll sit down with the DPW director to communicate that basically there's a lot of interest in the town. The surveys showed this. The committee is very much in favor of sidewalk expansion. Let's talk about what that exactly means, to the DPW, and how do we work together to go from where we are to get some sort of commitment as to how this may start to happen. And then if in fact the DPW director And if it needs to be the selectmen also, are in favor of moving forward with that, then it makes the planning board's job, easier. But so I don't think we can just at this point have the planning board tell the DPW director, the plan says we want more sidewalks, so let's do it. I think there needs to be a negotiation between some subset of this committee and the DPW to get buy-in from the DPW that, yeah, okay, it makes sense now. I think it's something I can do in 2023.
I think what might come out of
Phases.
it is they might need more staff. Like, I really feel a lot of the staff now are very strapped.
Mhm.
So maybe we'll have to be talking to Bill, and maybe the DPW will need another staff member, or
Well,
I know, I think a lot.
That's a decision they would have to make. I mean, we can only
Right.
go so far, but somehow we're gonna have to, if we decide as a committee, which we haven't done yet, if we decide that sidewalks is something we want to tackle sooner than later, then the next step is going to be, who do we talk to in town? And how do we start that discussion going? And how do we convince the people that need to be convinced? And then if they're convinced, then they have to tell us, based on their own schedules and spending, when it can happen, and then put a plan together. And if that means either something has to go in the budget or something has to go in the capital plan or something like that, but at least we can get, then we have, if we could do that, let's say that you talk to the DPW and the DPW says, fine, I think it's a good idea, we're going to do it. And I'll commit that we'll do this in 2023. And we say, fine, now we have a checklist on our spreadsheet that we can from time to time go back through the DPW or the town administrator or the selectman and say, just want to follow up that one of the things that we're looking forward to very much is the beginning of this sidewalk expansion project in 2023. Right now it's 2022. We just want commitment back from the DPW. This is still a live project. And, can we actually, near the end of 2022, publish something on our website to say, get ready, town? This is the plan for new sidewalks, which you all wanted, kind of thing. So there's a way to do this, but we haven't, that's all dependent on us, first of all, through the process we're going through now, deciding of all these multitudes of things we have in front of us. This is one we want to push.
And I think too, when we decide on a procedure and we get that template that we work with Donnie on, it'll be a lot easier to work on multiple things at a time. So we're dealing with that process, and maybe we're deciding on an item, and then we're working with the finance committee to come up with an idea of where the funding might come from. And then we're, having a liaison work with DPW. And I think once we establish the procedure, you kind of laid it out there, Rick. And so kind of solidifying that and making it official will, I think, be helpful for this committee to move forward.
Right.
So, Jean?
So I just wanted to say that I agree with John about some of the recommendations seem to be heavily emphasizing, forming new committees. They also are heavy on, the plan aspects of, plan for the future, but not directly implement anything. There were, studies, design studies or whatever studies that, I think just they're not actionable in except as a process unto themselves, which has value, but I think it just when we're trying to think about short-term things, it just seems like they're kind of part of perhaps what might be more of a vision for the downtown, conceptual design, and building a kind of community excitement around the possibilities that bring in people, developers, business people who would want to buy into that vision, who would want to put in, a certain style of sidewalk because it matches with the, what we want to see in the town. So, I guess those, I think we're kind of pushed and pulled between thinking big, having kind of a large vision of what we see doing in our downtown, and then also figuring out ways to kind of chunk that out and study what we need to study, envision what we need to envision, but kind of make it all, make our various efforts funnel into some kind of cohesive kind of vision for this work.
Yeah, I mean, oh, Fran, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I feel like we're in European vacation where we keep going around with Big Ben, and we all have these ideas. We all put forward what we thought were our priorities, but until we actually have that spreadsheet or the grid that we thought we were getting, that,
Yeah.
and we don't have Kathy to explain what she meant by the ranking. I mean, I just wonder whether it's something that we should just table and and try to address it when she can do it at our next meeting, or with, to your point, with Donnie talking to us about how to get there, because every one of these is good ideas, but like you don't know how to take that first step. And I'm not sure that I'm not sure that we know how to take that next step.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to, I was thinking the same thing. We're kind of winding down. We don't know where to go yet because we don't have our official list. It would be more helpful if Donnie were present. So, I mean, I'm happy to, take a motion to adjourn the meeting and we can recoup and, readdress when we have a full list. I did want to just respond to Jean's comment before we leave that when we did work on the master plan, it was intentional and it was frustrating while we were working on it, but it was sort of intentional from the planners, from us to have these items be more visionary rather than actionable. They were supposed to set the groundwork and the framework, but we weren't making those decisions quite yet. We were taking the community's feedback. We were putting into place priorities that reflected their feedback, but leaving it to these plans and these committees to really take action when it came down to it. I mean, that's kind of how I remember it, and that's kind of how we were told to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think we were concerned that if we got too far down the road, then the people we were really going to need to work with to make these things happen, being the proper staff in town or other boards or committees, were going to say, who the hell are you to make all these decisions sitting in a vacuum by yourself? So we tried to position it as these are things that'd be good to do, and now we need a way to work with the proper people to make them happen.
Yeah. Jean Kennedy? Oh, you're muted.
To that point, I guess we really need to discuss what our role is. I mean, when Rick starts talking about having a subcommittee meeting with the DPW director and blah, 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 that can go on for a while. If we, for example, and then when you go over the PowerPoint from the last presentation, Donnie had 3 or 4 or 5 communities, and each one of them had a variation on the implementation process in terms of what they saw their role. One committee, one town actually had their own bylaws adopted to enact a master plan implementation committee. There were others that saw themselves really as advisory to the planning board. And that's sort of where I would come down. I mean, the planning board's charge was to prepare and have adopted a master plan, and they did that. By virtue of the extensive public process and their daily involvement with other town departments, they are the primary board for implementing many of these recommendations. So I sort of see us being advisory to the planning board. However, we all realize that if we had 5 priority recommendations and they were all up to the planning board to implement, the planning board wouldn't have any time. No way they could do it.
Right.
So I think we need to keep in mind that our priorities as a group should be dispersed across the various town boards. So for example, sidewalks are good. That's a DPW project at some point. There may be downtown, that's more planning, historic, open space. We sort of spread the priorities around a little bit, then I think we'll be more effective in terms of getting some of these things done. As to going forward, I wouldn't, let me suggest how I would see what we should do between now and the next meeting. If in the short-term recommendations, there are 24, divided by 3, that means 8 out of the 13 members, more or less, made recommendations that are reflected in this document. So we still haven't heard from 5 or 6 other people. So I think that has to happen, so that this list should be completed by all 13 members. And Kathy, you know, maybe she should go back out and get the data over the next week or so from those individuals, and then resubmit to all of us a more complete, comprehensive list. We're then looking at a list that would have, you know, let's say 78 recommendations on it. We should go through maybe a second round. Everybody take those 78, because now we've eliminated 30 or 40 recommendations from the master plan as not even making the initial list. And then re-rank that subset. And then at the October meeting, we would have everybody's input. We would have a subset of all the recommendations. The natural grouping of categories would sort of rise to the surface. And I think we'd be in a good position then to discuss where we go from here. So I wouldn't want to lose the time between now and the October meeting, you know, by virtue of the fact that we have an incomplete list or, you know, not full representation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly going to go back to Kathy and ask her to make sure that everybody's items are on here. But I do kind of feel like we're putting the cart before the horse. I mean, as you mentioned, Donnie listed a number of ways that other master planning implementation committees kind of went about what they did and had different missions. And I think one of the first steps we probably need is to create a mission and our goals and set some procedures to see how we're going to work. And then we can get into what are our top items. But I don't know if others feel the same, you know, next meeting, kind of tackling more of the procedural issues and kind of get that out of the way. It could go that way, or it could go that we decide on an action item, we dive into it and we come up with a procedure that way. But I kind of feel like I'd rather do it the former, but you know.
I don't know. I think what Jean suggests is a good idea, to try and between now and October to get a complete list ranked again, and try and see what we've got and what to do about that, and see how that kind of starts to fall out. Maybe some of these procedural steps will kind of naturally fall out of that. To the extent they don't, we can talk about what are we missing to do our jobs more effectively. But I think I'd feel more comfortable if we sort of got our arms around what are some of the things we really think we want to move forward on. Then we can talk about how do we do it.
Okay, Dario?
I agree. Getting the list seems to be number one, because then we know where everybody stands. We know what our priorities are, but there's no reason at the same time, when we get the list, all of a sudden we stand there, you know, with the deer in the headlights, that we don't know how to proceed. So maybe we do a little bit of both and say, list without a doubt, because how can we act without everybody's thoughts and opinions? But when we have it, okay, now we got it. How do we run? And I don't know, because I've never been on one of these committees. A lot of you guys have been on so many more, so I could be, you know, dopey having no clue, which is probably the case. But I do know we have certain processes for doing design and doing projects, and a lot of them boil down to, you know, the goals, the facts, and the rules, and then you move forward. And we certainly will have the goals, because that would be what we all voted on, to say, here's our priorities. And then the rules on how we proceed, I don't know those, and maybe many of you have done this and you do know them, so that would just be me not knowing. But I think both can happen. And I think it's imperative that we know which ones are most important to all of us first, because that just stops, you know, the fishing expedition. So if there's 10 votes for item 26G, that's it. We hit that one first because that's our consensus.
Yeah, no, I
too
think
that-
the
that-
process that Jean described was a good one. I wasn't saying anything otherwise, but I do feel like we need that procedure, and maybe it does happen simultaneous or as a result of trying to tackle these top items. It's unique, Dario, I think, from other committees because it's not existed yet in Northborough before. So we're kind of creating it from scratch a little bit.
And I think having some real items we want to work on in front of us will make it easier to decide how to do it. As opposed to
Right.
coming up with a process and then finding out in certain cases it doesn't work once we see what the reality is. So I agree, we can do them kind of together.
Okay. All right. So then first step is to get this comprehensive list and start whittling it down once we get that. So I'll reach out to Kathy after the meeting and ask her for that, and we can go from there. And we had said we were going to meet once a month. Is that still,
I think we had an October 21st meeting scheduled.
did we already?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have it on my calendar for some
John,
reason.
did you have your hand up?
Yes, I, nothing substantial. Let's just proceed, Ashley.
No, that's fine, John. You can go ahead. If we already have our meeting scheduled and that item's already checked off. You just confirm that everybody's still around for 10:21 at 7 p.m.
No, I was looking at the list of short-term recommendations, and if we were going to discuss individual items a little further tonight, then if the consensus is to make sure we have an accurate set of votes and then move it, and that's the best thing to do. All
Yeah,
depends on
I
how much
think
how much longer you want to meet tonight.
Yeah, I think there's not too much of a point for further discussion on the items if the list isn't accurate. So probably doesn't
Yeah.
make sense.
I was just going to say, we can draw a reasonable conclusion that sidewalks may continue to be the top vote getter on the short-term list. You know, if it's got 6 votes now and one of these others would have to overcome it, you know, with a lot of votes that we don't see. And we've talked a bunch about sidewalks, and I think it's a very actionable item to the extent that, as Rick mentioned, DPW might tell you there's no way we're working on sidewalks for the next 5 years, or that they've been told to be amenable to the master plan committee and what they say, which I would think that would be the case. So I could see that, you know, I can predict that we're going to focus on that as one of our early action items that can be, you know, that can provide visible progress, which is good.
Yeah, and I think even if it's something that's completed 5 years down the road, if we get it on their list and we have funding set and we have a vote if we need at town
Right.
meeting that shows progress, even if it's not seen quite yet. So I agree.
Now, on the other hand, I was going to mention one other thing, which is there may be items on here that, you know, look obviously attractive, and they may already be involved in progress in another path. Let me give you an example. I was surprised to see only one vote as a short-term recommendation for the dog park, which is one of the items spoken about the most in town. And I put it on my short-term list. I don't know if that's my vote or someone else's, but now on the other hand, the dog park effort has been well talked out in multiple committees, and I know that town staff is working toward it. And, you know, we're predicting it's going to come up through the rec commission and might be a CPA request, you know. So if we identify those kind of items that don't need our time and input, then we can sort of just say, let's just monitor the status of that because, you know, one committee or another is already on top of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely kind of raise those to the top or create a separate list of items that are already underway or that we can very easily check off. So they're more than short term. They're kind of.
Yeah, or at least say, hey, we know this is progressing, so we sort of put it in that category where, it doesn't need a subcommittee. It doesn't need a push in any other area. It's already been pushed, which that one has for several years, as we
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, we should do that, and Kathy could be helpful too, and
Yeah.
highlighting some we're not aware of that maybe in the background, something is happening with. I know she mentioned something in one of her emails about stormwater.
Yep.
Stormwater
Yes,
stuff that was already being proposed in the plan by the planning board to change the zoning for that or something.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. And the stormwater, Amy, is complete, isn't it? Or
Yeah, it actually went through the Conservation Commission is doing the stormwater, but they already did it with Fred and Mia. It
Okay.
already was voted on at last year's town meeting. And the planning board also did the hazardous waste bylaw. And that's on the list, but we did it last year.
Okay.
Ashley,
Yep.
so as we're discussing all of this, and this may be farther down the road than you want to address right now, but there's some information that I think is critical for the committee to get. Maybe I'm the only one who needs it, but I'm going to put it out there. And for example, things like, we're often told, oh, well, Route 20 is a state highway, and so there are constraints that come along with that. And I'm wondering if we could get someone from Mass DOT or the DPW director to come in and tell us exactly what we can and cannot expect from our downtown, given the fact that we have this, this state highway going through. Route 20 goes through a lot of towns and it looks very different from town to town. So it'd be good to know what our parameters are. And even when Dario was talking about the trees, who do we subcontract out for trees? How, if we decide on a tree program, which I think is one of the goals, how much land does the town actually own and where can we do these things? Even things like public parking, I think we need to get some really definitive information along the way. I'm not saying the next couple meetings while we discuss process, but as someone also mentioned, we can walk and chew gum at the same time and maybe simultaneously get some of these things done.
I think that makes sense, not in the way that we shouldn't look at an item and say, oh, that seems impossible or that can't be done, that aspect of it. We should ask the questions first and get the information first on how or what's possible, right? I think that makes sense to me. Oh, Dario?
Well, yeah, the DOT stuff is actually pretty straightforward. You don't do it all the time, but we do it all the time. There's very simple regulations depending on the street. And every time we do a building or development, we have to go work through them and with them. A lot of the stuff that we're doing, whatever we come up with, it seems like it's, I'll just put it in quotes, the right thing to do. And in most cases, the DOT will play along with you with that stuff. So that's why you'll see it different in a lot of different towns. When you go through Marlboro and they have all the lanterns and stuff, they have a real sense of identity when you get there. You entered that downtown with something as simple as the lanterns, and they'll do the brick crossings, and all of a sudden that's still Route 20. And you can do that. They just have very fundamental regulations, and if whatever committee we get to go forward with that's no different than our town bylaws. So it seems overwhelming, but it's not that complicated. Just if we get our goals, that's just one of the things, one of the rules, as I called it in the past. I got the facts, the rules, and the goals. That's one of the rules that we just have to get and understand. But I don't think there's much we're going to do that they would get in the way of, because what we're trying to do is for the better good of everybody. And in most cases, the DOT rides along with that.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Very helpful. So something like the design study comes first. You kind of come up with what you'd like to see, and then you talk to the DOT and see what the limitations are, which hopefully there would be few.
And whoever's doing the design study will know the rules of the DOT because that's their profession.
Right.
And there are other things to take into account besides Route 20. There's Blake Street and there's Pierce Street and there's Church Street, and there's nothing to say that the new town center is going to be on Route 20 anymore. There could be ways to relocate what we want to do off of Route 20, and Route 20 would play a part in it. But so, yeah, it all, once again, it all depends what comes out of the study.
Exactly, Rick. And that's what they did in Marlboro. They did a bypass
Mhm.
to keep the downtown walkable.
So who knows?
Right. Yep, Jean Cahill.
I guess that brings up the, what our scope is as a committee. And, you know, one of the leading recommendations, I think, is to create a downtown revitalization committee. And I'm just wondering, you know, it does seem to be the focus of this committee and of, you know, the feedback that was given by the community was that the downtown is really, I think, what people are thinking we're going to be working on. So are we that committee? Or are we, you know, are we kind of going to be charging ourselves with, you know, that as our primary focus? And if so, do these, you know, the various projects funnel into that become under us as opposed to under, you know, the different committees in town?
I think we could easily get, that could be our entire focus if we were to be the ones working on the downtown. I think when we were working on the master plan, the idea was that the revitalization committee would be made up of some town board liaisons, but also business owners and residents, so that, you know, there was a broad variety of input on that committee and people that have a real big stake in the downtown area. But I think there's work for us to do before that, you know, they're tasked with their job. So getting a design plan going and obviously creating the committee, but a number of things that we'd kind of have to do before they can get down to it.
And that one of the big concerns during the master plan steering committee was to remind ourselves that this is a master plan for the entire town. You can actually have a master plan for your downtown. And so it brings us right back down. We're not even sure what our downtown is going to look like. And that revitalization committee, which was part of the economic development, was going to have the leadership would be the Board of Selectmen and the Planning Board, with the Assistant Town Administrator, the Planning Department, the CPC, and the Historic District Commission as the players in that subcommittee. So some of that has already been at least penciled in, if not etched in stone.
I think, Gene, I think that if we do our job properly, it's going to take us time to figure out what to do and how to do it, and then who to communicate with to get these things launched. And then once they're launched, we'll have some responsibility to keep track of them and report on how they're going. But I don't see us actually managing any of this as the committee that does the actual implementation of the project. Our job is just to kind of decide what to do it, in what order to do it, and who to work with to get things done, which is easier said than done. It gets back to Ashley's comment about a process, you know, for how we do this, which we're going to have to develop. But if we get involved with sticking with any one of these things long term, we're going to lose our ability to keep working down the list of everything else that we might want to do someday.
Yeah, divide and conquer. We spread the work out, and many hands make light work, right?
I mean, I guess I'm just looking at stuff that falls under the historic or historic district committee, and we've already started working on, or have been currently working on, a number of them. We have a historic preservation plan that we're working on right now. So, and I think that covers a lot of the underlying recommendations within that scope itself. It probably but really covers 7 or 8 out of the 12 that are under that umbrella.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, having that list of what's kind of underway or already accomplished and kind of checking those off, that'll make us feel great right off the bat. I
Right
mean,
off the bat, yeah. Who's doing this already? They're doing it, yeah. So I don't think that's a bad idea is to really bring some of this back to the committees that people are already on and say, okay, this one we're already working on. This one's in process. This one is on the docket.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Those are all things we can plug into this tracking spreadsheet we're going to be using.
Yeah, yeah,
It's easy to start with the ones that are already going on, you know.
right. Feel good about that.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So in terms of our next meeting, we'll want to ask Kathy for the comprehensive list, but maybe if every committee liaison could kind of bring their list of what's already completed or being worked on, you know, which of the priority items in the master plan already, you know, underway or completed, that would be helpful. And we can have, we can raise those to the top and check those off.
One thing I noticed also, Ashley, you might check with Kathy on, is I noticed that sometimes a particular item was shown up a couple of places, like, for example, sidewalks. It said there were 6 short-term votes for that particular item. And I went down further down the list and there was another 1 vote for that same master plan item. So there were really 7 altogether. I noticed a couple of other places where the same master plan, you know, section number was repeated more than once. So the vote count wasn't completely accurate. So maybe somebody go back and sort those out and get the vote counts proper also.
Yeah. And I think if there are a number of them that could be short-term and are in people's overall priorities,
yeah,
we should just bring that together too. So. And that goes back to Jean's comment about, you know, taking a few passes at this and kind of getting it down to something really workable.
And the opposite though is true for downtown because it's in several different sections. So it's not, so there's all the T's for that have to do with transportation, but downtown is in economic, it's in land use, so it's twofold.
Mm-hmm.
So grouping as well.
Yeah.
Would be really helpful. Grouping by topic. Okay. Okay. I mean, I feel like we are kind of at a good stopping point. I don't know if anybody else had anything else they wanted to chat about. Jean Kennedy?
Just briefly, if we are a committee that's only going to meet once a month for 2 hours, we need to really think what that following month's agenda will look like. Now, we can spend 2 hours going over recommendations, but to go back to your point earlier, Ashley, maybe we should carve out some time to talk about what the mission of the committee is. And what we could do is between now and that meeting, for anybody who's on the committee who wants to, they could write out a little mission statement that sort of reflects how they see this committee, send it into Kathy, and then along with the recommendations, a complete list of recommendations, we'll get some sort of a synopsis of what and how people view the mission.
Right.
So we meet in October, we spend 15 minutes to talk about and come up with a consensus on the mission. We get input from the various liaisons on what's already in the work, so we don't have to spin our wheels and talk about it anymore. And thirdly, we'll have a complete list of recommendations that will be a subset of what's in the master plan, and from which we can further refine and group to come up with some very pointed set of recommendations for us to proceed.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I was
agree.
thinking along the same lines in that it would be helpful if people kind of voted on what makeup the committee could be. Like Donnie had mentioned a number of ways, but I think that we kind of already have.
Is that a voting member?
Yeah, he just muted me too. But I like that idea better. The mission, I think that'll be helpful. The mission and the priorities, and we can move forward from there. So does everyone agree that that would be a good homework assignment for next meeting?
Sure.
Doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to wordsmith it, just a general sense of what you think our mission should be. Sorry, Dario, you had your hand up?
Yeah, so are we Kathy's boss? I mean, we're saying she's gonna do this, she's gonna do that, she's gonna do this. Is she like obligated, or does she know she has homework? Or, I mean, I don't know the hierarchy of this stuff, but we're saying she's gotta do all this stuff. Is that
She's
her
usually
job, or-
she's usually here to defend herself, but I'm happy to take on the task if she's not able.
I just want to make sure we're not piling everything on her plate because she's not here. I don't know the protocol, like does what for whom, or one of us should be volunteering to put that list together because she's not here. She's getting a lot of homework. I'm just asking. I don't know, you know.
So every
That is the
committee has
protocol.
staff,
You're
every
not at the
committee has
meeting, you
staff
get the work.
support. Every committee has staff support, and the town
Right.
planner is the staff support for our committee. So
Thank you.
basically, one way or another, she'll figure out a way to get this done.
Yeah,
Thank
she
you.
has somebody helping her out too. I think Michelle and the planning department helped her put together this this list. So, but yeah, I will offer to help if she needs
Thank
it.
you.
But I think she
I-
prefers. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
This is what happens if you don't come to a meeting.
so
So
vote everyone.
volunteering.
All right. All right.
I think Kathy's a victim of the town hall internet crash. So in her defense, it wasn't her fault.
Oh,
Yeah, I think she went home because she thought she would have better luck at home, but maybe not. Maybe it's something in their firewalls or something on there.
I think committees have been upset all week.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've got some good homework. We've got some good ideas about moving forward. So next meeting will come with, well, we'll have submitted to Kathy our ideas of the mission for the group. We can review the mission statements and a comprehensive list of recommendations. And then we can kind of start to whittle them down from there. And maybe we can take a stab at really carving some off the list right then in that next meeting, and try to come up with a handful of things to really move forward on in the short term. That would be good.
Yeah, oops.
Dario, yeah?
Yeah, just one more comment. Some of the items, you know, we may want to do as quickly as we possibly can, and some of them have a clock that's already ticking. Two of those would be the sidewalk and some of the trees. The sidewalk, the longer we delay, every time there's a new development, they don't have to put the sidewalk in, and it's hard to go back to someone that's already got their development done and say, oh, by the way, can you put a sidewalk in? So some of these have clocks that are ticking as opposed to, you know, like the overall master plan for the downtown. There's not stuff that will be, I'll just put in quotes, too late. I would keep that in mind. If any of these are on our critical path, some of them will have things that will go forward with or without us. So the sooner we act on ones that already have a clock that's ticking, the better it is, if those are in fact our priorities.
Yeah, I know that I think the sidewalks one is a good point. And like John said, it's gonna continue to remain at the top of the list. And I think a piece of that is sort of the idea of a multi-use trail. And I think maybe some people had that in mind, and there is a kind of a clock ticking on that, as there's a lot of grant funding for that right now.
Mhm.
And that could be a good immediate term kind of win, like you said, John, if it was a CPC application, maybe to move forward on something like that. But again, these are things we can talk about next meeting. It would be nice to get moving on things right away. So I know CPC applications are November.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
But
right.
Just the whole idea of sidewalks, it's more than just building sidewalks. It had something to do with where they're going to be. There was a whole thing about connectivity,
Yes.
about how to get from here in town to there in town. So just
Yeah.
having sidewalks put in because a developer's putting up a subdivision somewhere in town, so he's going to put in some sidewalk, doesn't really get to the point. The point is that we want sidewalks in specific places, whether anybody's building there or not, to make it easier for people to get from point A to point B. And some of those point A's and point B came out during the development of the plan. And so when we look at this, we have to take a look at where we want the sidewalks, not just where they're going to happen to, land in town. So that'll be part of the project.
No doubt about it. I mean, it'd be so nice to be able to walk to the aqueduct one, it's our town front page. And there's really not a way to get to it easily, even though it's not a development, but what a critical part of our history and something we have to brag about that's not accessible.
Mhm.
So to your point, Rick, I'm 100% on board with that. It's where they all go, not just the next time a developer puts up another housing development.
Right. And what's the best bang for your buck in putting in a sidewalk or a paved trail that really connects a number of places in town, I think. But
Exactly.
right. Okay.
I also just question the cohesiveness of design, the concrete, asphalt, brick, whatever it is, if it's done hodgepodge, then we look like a hodgepodge town. So, is that part of the design process that we apply for a grant to kind of make a solid recommendation around what our town in the aggregate will look like?
Mhm.
Right. And all those grants, the timelines are ticking, and CPC application timeline is drawing near. And if we want to make some quick action, then maybe it would be really good to narrow things down at the next meeting and have that be our goal. Come up with 3 items next meeting, whittle down the list to 3 items that we really want to work on quickly in the short term items, that not including those that other committees are already working on and already completed, new items for us to really make some progress on.
If we do that, should we send them to you or Kathy, or? if
You
we
mean
compare?
like whittling down, like you
Yeah,
mean
to
prior
3.
to the next meeting?
Yeah,
I think that's what the list we already did, and now we just need to have it
Yeah.
reformatted and completed by those people who haven't. If you've already done it, it's done. I mean,
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree, Fran. I think, taking this list, making it comprehensive, and then working next meeting to really pare it down together to say, these are the ones we're moving forward on. And if we can group some things, then we know where we're at. I think that'll be a lot easier to pare it down if we can group some of those items.
Well, it'd be good to get the list more in advance.
Yeah.
And I know Kathy was originally, it was late was because not everybody responded, and some people responded late. I think we just have to put a stake in the ground and say, that Kathy, I'd like to get the list, let's say maybe a week before the meeting is too much, but at least 2 or 3 days before the meeting.
I think if we said, can we have the list by the end of next week? Because it's already here. It's just double checking it and maybe putting it in a different format.
Well, it was also Jean's point that not everybody responded.
Okay.
And to get unanimous response is going to be hard. And so we got to tell Kathy at some point, if you don't get everybody, at least get us the list we need with as many people responded as possible. So I agree, we ought to
Yeah.
let it go a little bit longer to see how many people that didn't respond. But you can't wait until, you know, the night before of the meeting to wait till people respond. Some people just may not respond at all. So maybe
Yeah.
you could say, like, if the meeting's October 24th, you know, to say that October 17th, take all the input you've gotten by October 17th, format it, you know, the way we've talked about tonight, and get it out to us by the following Monday or Tuesday, and give us a couple of days to go through it before the meeting on the 24th.
And with
Yeah,
all
I mean,
due
I'd say even
respect, I'm sorry, with all due respect, Ashley and Rick, I think it's up to you to help the members that aren't responding to Kathy. I mean, ask, you know, have Kathy give a due date, but if they don't respond, you guys go after, you know, and say, Fran, what, you know, how hard is it? Can you send it to Kathy, right?
Yeah, I wasn't aware that,
Yeah.
that everyone didn't respond, so. It's good.
Well,
No,
check
no,
with her.
it's
I mean,
no.
that was Jean's assumption. I think it's a good assumption. You can check with her just to make sure, but if that's the case, I'd be willing to work with you on that, Ashley. If we get on a list of people who haven't responded yet, we can bug them.
Yeah,
Okay,
that was only an assumption on my part.
So let's verify that to begin with, but if it's true, but I still think we need to get that list in our hands a couple of days before the meeting, so we can read through it and react to it a little bit before the meeting.
yeah, definitely.
Well,
And
it
I
seems
think-
like, oh, sorry.
That's right, and just come prepared, like, to say, I don't know, to vote on which ones are really important. Which ones should really, I mean, we'll see what rises to the top, obviously, but anyway.
Ashley,
Go
are
ahead,
you
Amy.
thinking some of this stuff might be up for CPC funding for this year?
It's possible if they're plans that we're looking to get, or, you know, some short-term things, it's possible.
I just think that if we're not getting these until another 3 weeks,
I know.
then yeah, having, you know, they have to go out for bids and proposals and estimates. I don't know that's reasonable to think that they would come back in time.
And just
Yeah.
remember, CPC money is affordable housing, open space preservation, historic preservation. CPC money is not going to pay for sidewalks.
Nope.
It's not going to pay for the downtown. It's only certain
No.
specific stuff
Right.
the CPC is good
Yeah.
for. So
It's
Okay.
very specific items, and I mean, I have a few things in mind, but it's a stretch for sure.
Okay.
But I know John talked about, you know, short-term, you know, a positive showing, some short-term action, and I agree, it would be great. So,
the bigger question is, when is the budget going to be completed? And can we convince someone that they ought to put something in their budget, you know, for fiscal 20, whatever it's going to be next July,
yeah,
to do something like this? Like, if we want to do a downtown study, you know, we can put an application in for a grant to help, but maybe, you know, Kathy, she funded, you know, VHB through her budget.
Right.
I see what
So
you're
maybe she put something in her budget for next year to fund a study for the downtown. But then we need to know what the drop dead date is for her to put her budget together.
Right.
So it's a combination of grants and budget.
okay.
Hmm.
Amy, you were gonna say something before and I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I interrupted you. Sorry. I was just thinking, it's way back now, though, that the only people who wouldn't have submitted their recommendations would have probably been Adrian and Bill, right? Because the rest of us are here.
Are you calling everyone out?
No, I'm just saying that maybe they did, because what are the odds that the two people not here didn't do the recommendations?
It could be that everybody has them in. It could be that some people here didn't and they don't want to admit it. That's fine.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. I assumed someone would say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I'll get them to you. Never mind.
You never know. But
Hmm.
well, we'll check in with Kathy and see. And it could have been that there was just a lot and they didn't catch everything. So that's it. All right. So for next meeting, just to recap, we'll get the comprehensive list and we'll whittle it down to a handful of short-term actionable items. And prior to the meeting, everyone will get in a description of what they see as the mission of the committee. And we can kind of vote on that at the next meeting. as well. And I think that's what I have. And if everyone could come, everyone who is a liaison from another committee or commission board could come with the items that they're already working on or have completed from the master planning recommendations list.
Mhm.
That'd be great. All right.
Good.
Maybe, actually ask Kathy to get an email out next day or two to the committee, just reminding us, also those committee members who weren't here tonight, so they, you know, what it is they have to do next.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right. Does anybody want to make a motion to adjourn, or does everyone feel like we need more discussion?
I move we adjourn.
Second,
All right. All right, I'll take a roll call. Fran,
Aye.
Julianne,
aye.
Rick,
Aye.
Amy,
Aye.
Millie,
Aye.
Jean Kennedy,
Aye.
Jean Cahill,
Aye.
Dario, John,
Aye.
Tracy.
Aye.
All right. Meeting has adjourned. So we'll
Thank
see
you,
everyone
Ashley.
on October 21st.